I'm really excited today that we have Roberto Ascalon here with us. He's going to, in place of a reflection today or a sermon, we're going to be interviewing. I'm going to be interviewing Roberto, who's a poet, a youth educator, a very funny and wise and interesting guy, and hearing some about his experience. Right now we are in the theme of the month of June at Valley Mountain is called Mycelium. We all belong to each other. Mycelium is the term for the root network of mushrooms. So mushrooms are actually the largest living thing on planet Earth. If you don't count Earth itself, mushrooms are, there are certain mushrooms that are the size of 1,600 soccer fields, that big. And they are connected through this root network called mycelium. And so you find these little individual mushrooms, as Dr. McKinney pointed out to me this morning, that sometimes it looks like there's just one single solitary thing all on its own, especially in light of the tragedies that have happened this week and the people who have felt so alone. That often things look like we are really, really separated, and yet there is a connection. There is a root network that binds us together, whether or not we can feel it. There is something there. And we're celebrating mycelium this week and what we can learn from this wonderful natural phenomenon. We're going to do a really deep dive into it next week when we have Dave Andresen, who's going to be giving the reflection, who's a certified permaculture genius. I don't know the term, but he's going to take us way deep into mushrooms and how these mycelium work. And they're kind of the central thing in compost, which is like nature's metaphor for resurrection. Taking these things that seem like there's nothing in them and bringing new life out of them. So last Sunday we met at the youth jail instead of here. We went to the site of the new youth jail and it was great. We had about 80 of y'all came out and we had our service out there and the cops showed up and we were just starting communion and I was like, come on, let's do this. Maybe I shouldn't have said that out loud. But you know, they let us do our thing, and we had a powerful worship service there. It was very moving. We collected about $350 for Creative Justice, which is an arts-based nonprofit that helps create alternative pathways to traditional sentencing for youth incarcerated. We got about 50 signatures on a petition to ask the county officials to halt construction until the community stakeholders have had a longer conversation about what the building could be used for. Besides just for caging kids. And so instead of sending that in right away, I knew a lot of y'all weren't there at that service, so we're going to keep it around for the next couple Sundays. And so there is a copy here that I'm going to put on the snack table, and there's a copy on the kind of the prayer station over there as well. That you're going to have time to sign those during communion today. I am just happy that you are here. With Roberto, we're going to be talking, last Sunday we talked about mycelium and how in the root network of mycelium, there is no central mycelium. There's no most important root or branch or piece of the puzzle. All the mycelium have kind of their own independent value and worth. We looked at individual lives and how our society says some lives are more important than others, and we challenged that. We're going to be looking at mycelium through the lens of culture today as we talk with Roberto. So just a little teaser about what you're in store for. And that's one of the reasons we're singing all these awesome songs in different languages today. Before we sing again in the next song, I'm going to invite you have been welcomed, and I invite you to welcome the neighbors around you.
So I'm going to be reading from Colossians chapter 3, verses 9 through 11. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have stripped off the old self with its practices and have clothed yourselves with the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge according to the image of its creator. In that renewal, there is no longer Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave and free, but Christ is all in all. Amen.
I'm so excited to invite Roberto Ascalon forward. Roberto is a poet, an educator, as I mentioned, and please give him a welcome as we. Thanks for saying yes to this.
Thanks for having me.
I'm going to ask you to use the mic pretty well. You can use on the stand, or you can
Okay.
hold it up. Oh, I'm going to turn it on. So many instructions. That's my problem before.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great.
Well, thanks for saying yes to this.
Of course.
So glad you did. I thought it would be great if you could start, as today we're talking about multiculturalism, Mycelium, with just a little bit about your cultural background and maybe how you've related to that and how that's evolved over time.
Let's see. How about I read a poem?
All right.
Because it actually it'll do a lot of the work, and
Great.
and then we can talk about that.
Yeah. Do it.
I was about to start like, well, I was born in New York City, but then it's all here. So
Perfect. Yes.
Great.
I love how artists think.
do you guys like Spam? Have you ever had Spam?
Great.
Yeah, Spam in the can. No? See?
Like email spam?
Yeah,
love
not the email spam.
Okay.
This is the etymology comes from the can rather than the email. So, but so this is a poem called Spam, and it'll tell you all those things.
Hey.
My father's love is a fried Spam sandwich. On Wonder Bread with extra mayo, all wrapped up in aluminum foil. Spam is my father's version of Catholic communion.
Yeah.
It's his way of saying, I love you, which I didn't hear very often when I was growing up. But I ate a lot of Spam. In church, you eat the body of Christ and receive holy life eternal. And with Spam, you eat pork that stays good in a can forever. Sunday brunch at its finest at my house, garlic fried jasmine rice, laced bright with sea salt, pan-seared, wrinkled skin hot dogs, eggs sunny side up with the edges brown to a fine crunch, and my favorite, golden brown leaves of thin sliced Spam fanned out like a deck of brand new cards. It is a fact, Filipinos love to eat canned meats. And I wasn't born in the Philippines. I grew up in New York City where nobody really ate Spam. Back home, it was a joke, a sign, a tattoo, a tell, a mark. Spam is kitsch. It belongs in the secret stash of a 50s fallout shelter in between the dusty boxes of iodine and the shotgun shells. And the truth is much deeper. It's realer than real. It's not food, it's irony. Spam is the first animal that man ever invented. It's G.I. Joe's favorite dinner, and it goes great with a scorched earth policy. It's what the people get after their livestock is slaughtered and all the able-bodied men have been killed. It's the meat that comes after the war. Maybe that's why Southerners love it so much. I can still see my father's face inhaling the sizzle hot, turning the crackling slices over and saying, you are gonna love this. And at school, I held my knapsack close so that the other kids couldn't smell my house when I walked down the halls. I thought they might smell the hangdog look in my father's eyes, taste the history of yesterday's fry pan. You see, Spam is class in a can. It's the mark of the colonizer. It is a metal brand on the inside of my tongue. Spam is the shame of animals not knowing the names for all of their parts. And it's the salt flesh of yesterday's American colonial expedition surviving heat wave after heat wave in the equatorial pantries of my father's homeland. Spam is the American flag. Come home to roost in my palate, take up residence in my arteries. It's the last 100 years of neo-colonial foreign policy bumping up our insurance premiums. Spam really is the export product that Iraqi children, Afghani children, children from Guam, children from Hawaii, children from the Philippines, children on the res, they all ask for Spam by name. Spam is my father's fatty love. It's the rosy pink that says, "I care," straight from the pigs of America's heartland.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was a shorter way of telling you that whole story. So,
Yeah.
but I grew up in New York City, and
Wow.
that means that's when I think about culture, I think of that. The phrase, the melting pot. It's more like a. I wouldn't say it's a. I think of food and I think of place, but I also think of people and a collection of people. My cultural background, my ethnicity is, of course, being Filipino. I also identify as brown. I also I identify as a man. I'm cisgender in that way, and I'm straight. So I guess all of these things, actually, each part and piece of my identity all carries with it pieces of culture. And then I can, depending on where I am, I can, be any one of those pieces. When we're talking about race and ethnicity, I think that's a really important one, because often in the places that I inhabit, I can present as that ethnicity. I'm not sure that it is something that I was about to say that is it the primary thing about me? No. Is it beloved to me? Yes. Is it something that I'm always interacting with, around feeling and thinking through? Yeah. So it's an interesting thing, and yeah. But if like that poem, if I were to share some food with you, you'd be instantly involved in my culture. So I think that's one of the ways that I was just cooking at a party. The first thing that I did was go to the party, and I bought all this food and was marinating all this stuff, and that's one of the ways that I engage with other people around who I am and how I share it.
Yeah. I mean, in that poem, it has such a sophisticated, such a deep and. There's your boy.
That's my boy.
Yeah. He wants to say hi.
You wanna come over here?
It's all right. Yeah, finally. Spotlight. When did you write that poem?
I wrote that poem through a writing class, and one of my students she's Filipina, and she was like, "Oh, you should really." We just did a prompt about what it would be like to eat other people or something like that, and it actually came from
artists.
It came from this idea of communion, this idea of what would happen if you ate. What do people taste like? And I remember cutting my thumb on a can of Spam, and just that whole idea of communion and eating, partaking in God.
Nice work, everybody. Thank you.
And she, like my students, often inspire me to write pieces, and she said, "You really have to write that piece," and that's what it turned into. So, and it was also about lunches. Lunches at school lunches, which are really fraught, right? Either you're eating the $1.25 lunch, or you're bringing it from home, and then it's you might have some weird stuff. Yeah. And that's actually a true story. I would take these Spam sandwiches, and they would revert back to dough because of the mayonnaise, and then I'd have to like peel open and it was so embarrassing, so I wouldn't eat. My
Yeah.
did know what he's doing, like in terms of like cooking, like food. Yeah, it was like, yeah. So young people, food, race, ethnicity. My family often pop up in my poetry.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like there was a lot in that poem, the way that I was hearing it, of you taking things that dominant culture labels in these ways that you name, of kitsch or kind of embarrassing, a symbol of class, a brand, all these kind of words used, taking that and turning the tables on it some and embracing it and working with it in a really beautiful and artistic way. I think something that for me has been inspiring about this concept of mycelium as I've been learning about it is how it breaks down the myth of the mainstream. So the idea that there is such a thing as a mainstream is this idea that I just used to take for granted. Like there's a mainstream. It's like the main thing, and then there's all the other things, and that's how we're taught. And it's taken me a long time to really come to terms with the idea of the mainstream just means like the most dominant group. Whatever is normal for them, that's mainstream, and everything else is a divergence from the mainstream, which is like another form of just colonialism. And so, yeah, I guess, was this something that you would have been able to write when you were a much younger person? How did you come to the place of being able to work with these symbols and turn the tables on them?
I love that. Well, just like what we did last week when we flipped the tables.
Yeah.
That was just beautiful. I would not have been able to write that when I was younger. I didn't know enough about myself, and that it would have the sting of shame would have been too much for me to unpack when I was younger.
Yeah.
So, holding space for young writers is part of how you can remove that sting of shame by like making space, at really young ages, just expressing, but especially in high school, to be able to have a place to unpack that is so important. And what happens in terms of mainstream, these small writing groups like Youth Speaks or Writers Youth Speaks, when they occur, they often run counter to mainstream. And when you individualize and individuate, and when you tell your story, your authentic story, you'll always run counter to the mainstream, just because that process is the thing that makes you and differentiates you from other lives and other beings.
Yeah.
So it's a great, poetry becomes an antidote to mainstream culture. It's a transformative act, just sitting down to write, especially when you're young.
Yeah, yeah. And what are the ages that you work with?
Let's see. I've worked with younger folks, but mostly high school, middle school, and then up. Yeah. So.
Is that through the public school system?
Sometimes. Sometimes it's with groups like Arts Corps, sometimes Hugo House, and all these other places. I used to, I'll read another poem about some of the folks that I work with. I worked at a school called Interagency, and there's one down the street. It's Southwest Interagency at the time was a really tough place to work. Kids were going through a lot, and they still are. 3 years ago, I think, there were a lot of people, a lot of young men who committed suicide. It was really tough. So, and to try to, sometimes you can't reach across from yourself to young people. And this is about, no, I'll read the poem first. This is called The Fire This Time. Or, how come some brown boys get blazed right before class and other questions without marks? How much damn broke does it take to want to burn just before class, lung green with chaos? How many times the police come to the door, way past late, your auntie face forlorn and flashing in the turning blue? How much knuckle in a boy, fist gotta break cheek till body want to go numb? How much brave you gotta front, pay forward, like a hard stare, like a work muscle jaw? How many legal papers say stay or go, right or nothing, home or jail, love or palm skin? How many words or promises did dad, mom, and God knows who else have to crush so that you spit out your eyes and slouch like a demon, daring me to call out your name as if it had power anyway, as if your own name, when you strangle it out your throat, spill God stuff, God, like a broke egg, baby born into fire. How come fire put you to bed instead of sweet hands, good hands? Why they put bad hands? Why bad hands? Why the fire this time, God? Why? We ain't done nothing yet, and nothing wrong, except the babies are on fire. Babies burning by the stairs before school begins. So, there's part of the act of writing is trying to figure out what's happening, like what's occurring.
Yeah.
And trying to give name to the really complicated forces that create our lives, our individual lives. I mean, to kind of like, mycelium runs in networks and strands and threads, and you can't see it. And the mushroom is actually just the fruiting body. It's just the thing that you can see. Meanwhile, there's a vast, complicated network of intertwining, invisible things that are actually creating this one small thing. And you can't see that complicated, vast network that made this person who they are. And the act of writing is trying to suss that out, give name to that, to, differentiate that and make that, to name that.
Yeah. To me, that's like kind of, you just defined the spiritual quest right there in a lot of ways too. It's this search for understanding without ever thinking that you're going to get it. But it's diving into that mystery and following it where it leads. You asked, there's a question to God in this thing, which sounds a lot like a psalm. I don't know, the psalms are these poems in the Bible. It's like 150 of them. And a lot of them are praising God and everything, but a lot of them are like, what? Why? This makes no sense. I did nothing wrong. These people are suffering. Children are being tormented, and I don't see any answer for that. And then the poems often don't end with like, but here's a nice little bow on top. Like, it's all okay, actually. They end with a question. Could you share a little bit about like your spirituality and how art intertwines with that?
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I never. I grew up Roman Catholic, but I never subscribed to that. my mom, though, loves the church, but in a very kind of liberal Catholic kind of way. Right. She was a reader, and she just loves the performative aspect of church, and how it's engaging. And it also offers her a sense of culture that, oh, she can hear the same songs here and the same rhythms here, and then go back to the Philippines and like, oh, it's like this unifying bit of culture. For me, I would I would go down by the East River and throw rocks in the river. During Sunday school, like CCD classes, I hated going to CCD classes. I thought they were terrible, and I felt guilty the whole time. And I would just throw rock pebbles in the East River. Spirituality, I think, is an entirely different story than religion and the overlay of religion. And for me, spirituality is it is achieved in communion when you think about people, like the connection of people. So that's why I really love Mountain and Valley, because from my understanding, it started in people's houses, and like it doesn't have to be in a space. Like, it's not about spaces, it's about the communion between people, which is really going back to the origins of the church, from what I know, and this reaching out and of a body of people is wonderful. So you can achieve that in a poetry writing circle. You can achieve that, at your spin class. You can achieve that in so many other places. But when people get together and reach out across, is I think God is present. And that's another thing. To say God, Annie and I have this like discussion all the time. This about whether or not I say like the big thing, or so when we pray, we have to kind of like we say like the infinite or I often say the universe, and then sometimes we interchange that with God, because I think that there is a reflection of sentience in the big thing, but oftentimes it's like hella big, and like it's kind of mean sometimes. Like, and we don't, like, in our smallness, we can't really apprehend God. We put those three letters on it because it's easier. And it's like a shorthand, but I think to assume God is just saying that, noticing the scale in the universe. Like, I am very small, and there is a bigger thing, and not to stop with the ego. Like, oh, I'm what? The F am I? That's, I don't really matter. Like, in the whole of things, like, even though I am the center of the world, my own world, I happen to be, as each one of us are, and that again comes to this decentralization idea of mycelium. It doesn't have an up or a down. It goes into spaces and it finds, there's no, it's omnidirectional.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
You mentioned the first of all, I think your definition of spirituality, I was sensing nobody else here shared that. So I think you're really alone. No, it's like everybody's like, keep talking. You mentioned the origin of the church and how, we are actually in the season of Pentecost right now in the official church calendar, which is the season of celebrating the beginning of the church. And there's this amazing story about the beginning of the church, which is all these people start talking, and they're all talking in different languages, and yet everybody can understand each other. And the thing I think is so cool about that story, and kind of reminds me of what you're talking about in Mycelium, is that I love that the story isn't they all started talking in the same language. They were able to understand each other because they used one language. That's not what the story says. The story says they speak many different languages and they understand each other at the same time. Rather than like centralizing and consolidating and like a picture of the good life being like where it's all under control of one thing, the church is a place of like intense diversity and multiculturalism where there is no dominant culture or mainstream, and yet we are not isolated at the same time. That difference doesn't create a chasm that's uncrossable. It awakens us to the nature of God.
Yeah.
So.
I'll read a poem. I'll read a poem about just.
And let's have this be our
last
closing piece to this.
Great. I have to. It's like oh. This is embarrassing. I never read off of my phone, but this poem is called Intonation. Intonation. Now, if I were to speak from the Irish portion of my tongue, I might say the title of this poem just a wee bit like this. Intonation. But maybe me now feel like me want to go talk like me from no little green island. So tonight me ever go say the title of this poem like this. Intonation. Or maybe, on second thought, I'm going to say the title of this poem like this. Intonation, you see, I, like all poets, live intonation. Intonation, we are judged not on the content of our character, but by the color of our thoughts and by the sound of our tongues. Intonation, we eat our words. Dialectivores are we. Eaters of ink and sound, we glut on poetry and language and get fat and then squeeze the excess from our pores so that our skins become the very vellum upon which we finger paint the stories of our lives. Intonation, our tongues are fruit. I didn't feel like that was appropriate, but intonation, we with our tongues. We fool around with meaning. We mess with metaphor. See, we are what we hear. Intonation. Now, here we hear what we are. We see what we say. We say what we are. And ere I say an eyeful, I say ear to ear. You begin to see me as chained by the English, but forget about that because our tongues do the body rock and lock pop the stocks of hip hop, and then stop. Here, intonation, sound is visible. Here, intonation, words are sounds. Hear this, that I am writing upon the very air in this room. This is the legend of the map of language. Emancipation from the cultures of the world. Liberty through the sound of the word. Civilization bound by sound, symbol made flesh. Our tongues will set us free. Intonation.
Thank you. So good. Instead of me giving the benediction, Roberto has offered to offer a poem to bless us.
This poem is called "The Day is Long and Full of Names." Remember when we were little and there was a party and we went to the party and we were so nervous because of everything. We were so nervous in our bathing suit and our breathing skin, and we cried because it was too much. And everything was so new, everything so big, everyone so new, and the faces so strange. And then someone asked us our name. Our name was all we ever needed, all we ever wanted. And they took our hand and led us through it all. And then we began to learn all the names. Before, we were so afraid of the water until we opened and began to learn its name. And then we were swimming, and the water so cold and fresh, and the sun was good and warm, and the laughter was everywhere. And then we were running, and then the grass, and then our knees rubbed green, and the sun was so bright, and the laughing was everywhere. We spun, and the light fell through our eyes, and we ate small, sweet things, and the sun was in our bellies, and the laughing full of sweet, and everything so huge, so full, and so many voices. And we held hands, shrilled and jumped, and our little bodies moved, and someone showed us magic, and our faces fell open in awe. We hugged and loved our new friends forever, as much as our little bodies could hold forever. And we drank cool, tall water and missed our parents. And we played hide and seek and closed our eyes so no one could see us. And we chased and ran, and our bodies grew tired with the day, tired and aching from the one day full of magic. And we grew sleepy, and we didn't want to leave, and we cried because we knew we had to go home. We knew we had to go home. And we had lived so much that day. We were so full and tired, our muscles couldn't lift our heads. And we were carried to the car, and still, we heard people laughing and swimming. But the car door was open, and someone we loved was carrying us to the back seat, where there was a blanket. And we can't remember how we got home, but we did. And the day was long and full of names.